Hello and welcome to this Tinkershop tutorial. My name is Martin from the Innisfil Idea Lab and Library, and this video is part 2 of our MakeCode Arcade basketball game tutorial. So if you didn't watch the first video, make sure you go back and watch that one, because we're going to be building off the code that we made in that earlier tutorial. And if you somehow lost the code that you made in the first tutorial, you can always head to our GitHub page where we post all of the code from any of our video tutorials. So you can see our little preview of our polished game that we're going to be making today. You can see we now have lives, and if we miss a shot, we lose lives. If we get the ball in, you can see we can now score points, and of course the basketball moves, the net moves side to side just to make the game a little more challenging and fun, and as well as some other additional improvements. So let's jump right into it. You're going to go to arcade.makecode.com, and then we're going to click import, and we're going to import the file that we created in part 1. So I called mine Arcade Basketball Part 1. I'm going to open that. And here we go. This should be pretty familiar to you. And just to recap on where we left off last time, we have a moving sprite, and we can shoot balls that are a special projectile kind of sprite, and if we get the ball in the net, we win the game. So pretty simple, but not too challenging, and so we're going to add in all those improvements to make it a more complete and fun game. So the first thing we're going to do is add in our scoring system, and this is actually really easy in MakeCode Arcade. And of course, we're going to want to increase the player's score every time they shoot the ball and it goes into the net. And if you remember from last time, we already have a block that handles what happens when our projectile sprite, which is our ball, overlaps with our basketball net that has a special kind of hoop. And so right now it's set to when those two things overlap, that we trigger the game over function. So we're actually going to get rid of this block completely. So I'm going to click and drag it back into the category section, and that'll just delete that block entirely. And so instead we're going to add in a new type of block that handles incrementing the score. So we're going to go into the info category. So click that, and then find this block that says change score by 1. You're going to drag that into the overlap block. And now when we shoot the ball, you can see it increased the score, but for some reason it increased the score by like 10 or more instead of just by 1. And that's because the ball actually takes a few seconds when it hits the net to actually pass through it. And so this block is telling it, as long as that's happening, keep changing the score by 1. So what we have to do is not only change the score by 1 as soon as the ball overlaps the net, but also just get rid of the projectile, the ball, entirely, so it doesn't keep incrementing. So we have to destroy our projectile sprite, and that's pretty easy to do. We just go into the sprites category and down into effects, and then find this destroy my sprite block. I'm going to click and drag that in. And now let's try this out in the simulator. When we shoot and get it in the net, oh wait. Okay, so it's right now set to destroy my sprite, so it actually got rid of our character. So we have to make sure we change that to destroy projectile. So let's go back in and try that again. Now if I score, it increases our score, but only by 1 point. There we go. Okay, so pretty easy. We now have our scoring system implemented. But we also want to make sure that the player is penalized somehow when they don't get it in the net. So we're going to do that by adding lives. But the first thing I want to do before that is actually make our net move back and forth just like our player is. So it'll make it a little bit more challenging to get the ball in the net if the net's moving back and forth. So we're going to do that next. Alright, so we're going to make our net move from side to side, just like our player, which will just make it a little bit more of a challenge to get the ball in the net. And I mean, you might have realized that we've basically already written the code that we need for our player sprite. So we just need to replicate that for our net sprite. And you can see in our onStart block, the code's right here. Under set my sprite velocity and set my sprite bounce on wall. So let's do that for the net. We're going to click on sprites, grab the set my sprite velocity block, drag it into our onStart block, and then change it from my sprite to net because we want the net to move back and forth. And then if you remember, this VX value refers to the movement of our sprite side to side. So that's okay. We can leave it at 50. And the VY is the pixels per second that the sprite moves up and down. Now we don't want to move it at all up and down, only side to side. So we'll set the VY value to 0. And you can see our net now just moves to the side, but we want it to bounce on the walls and stay in the screen. So we're going to go back into sprites and then down in effects, grab this set my sprite to stay in screen block and drop that in the onStart. And then remember to change it from my sprite to net. We need to change it from stay in screen to bounce on wall. And we have to change it from off to on. So now you can see our net also moves back and forth. And that's great. The one thing I want to do to kind of improve things a little bit while we're here is maybe let's make our sprite move a little bit faster, so it doesn't take so much time to get to the net and line up a shot. So under this block here, set my sprite velocity to, we'll increment the VX value from 500 to 100 pixels. So let's try that out. Great, so our sprite moves a lot faster. And I think it works good that our net moves at a different speed than our sprite. But one more thing I want to do is maybe make our ball projectile move a little bit faster. So that's in our on button press block where we set the speed. Right now the VY value is minus 100. It's negative because it's moving up. So let's make that minus 150. And that should speed up the ball quite a bit. So let's try that out. And there we go. It's just a little bit snappier. And I think that movement just makes the game a little bit better to play. So you don't have to do that last part, but it's up to you. I think it plays a little bit better this way. Okay, so the next step now is to add our life system so that, it's great we get a increased score when we get the ball in the net, but we want to also penalize the player when the ball misses the net. So let's do that now. Alright, so to add lives to our game is actually really easy. The tricky part is going to be detecting a missed shot and then taking away a life, but we'll get to that. So first let's add our lives, and we'll add them into our on start block, because at the very start of the game our player should have some lives. So we'll go into the info category and drag this set life to 3 block and add that into our ads or our on start block. And I'm going to change it from 3 to 5, and that just means the number of lives that we have at the start of the game. So you can make that more or less if you want. It doesn't really matter. So the next step is going to be to somehow detect if a ball misses the net, and if it does, we want to subtract 1 life from our lives. It's a little tricky because what we have to do is basically run a continuous check. So we're going to run a loop that just constantly checks the position of the ball. And where this gets tricky is, of course, when we shoot a ball, we can detect its position. But once that ball's gone, there is no ball. And so if we're running a continuous check on something that doesn't exist, our game is going to give us an error and it won't run because we're telling it to look for something that doesn't exist. It exists when we shoot it and we press a button, but once it disappears, there is no ball. So we'll have to create a variable that tells us whether or not a ball exists, and if it does, then we'll run our check on its position. So let's go ahead and create that variable. So variable is just something, it's like a word we can basically assign a value to. So it can be a number, like our life is actually a variable that we're set to a number of 5. But you can also give a variable a value of words or letters, and variables can also have a Boolean value, which just means true or false. So don't worry too much about that. It all kind of makes sense as we do this. So let's go ahead and create our variable. We're going to go into variables and then make a variable. And then we have to put in a name for a variable, and I'm going to call our variable ball exists, because this variable is going to keep track, remember, of whether or not a ball currently exists in the game. So we're going to click OK, and now you can see all the variables in our game. Our sprites and our projectiles are a kind of variable, and our new ball exists variable. So at the beginning of our game, we're going to have to declare this variable and give it a value. So grab this set ball exists 2 block and drag it to the bottom of our on start block. And by default, or on the start of our game, the ball won't exist yet because we have to wait for the player to press a button. So this value is going to be false. So to grab a false value, you're going to go into the logic category and then down to false. Grab that and place that to set our ball exists value to false. So our game starts, there's no ball yet, so saying a ball exists would be a false statement. So you can think of it that way. Of course, when we press a button, a ball is created. So on our button press, we'll want to change the ball exists value to true. So let's build this out again inside the button press block and change the value of our ball exists variable to true in that instance. So we go into variables, set ball exists to, drag that in, and then back into logic, and this time we'll grab a true block and set ball exists to true. Because when we press a button, a ball now exists, so that is now true. Okay, and now in this instance here, where the ball goes in the net, we want to set the ball exists back to false, because when we actually get the ball in the net, the ball disappears, right? We destroy the projectile, which is our ball. So we got to set ball exists back to false. So we're going to go back into variables, set ball exists to, and then into logic, grab a false block, and set that value back to false. Okay, so now that we can track whether a ball exists, we can run our function that checks if the ball exists, and if so, what is its position. And if its position is less than about 2 pixels for the Y value, we'll know that the ball has missed the net, so that's a missed shot, and we'll subtract a life. So building out this kind of conditional check can be, it's a little bit confusing if you've never kind of done some logic in your programming, but it's pretty easy once you've kind of done it. So let's just go ahead and build out this function. So again, we're going to create a function that just continuously checks the state of our ball. And there's a bunch of loops in this loops category that we could actually use, but there's one under game that's pretty easy for us, and it's this on game update every 500 milliseconds block. So grab that from the games category, and we'll just drag that onto our code. And so what this block does is it will run any code inside of it every 500 milliseconds. So that's exactly what we want to do. And we can change this to run it faster or slower, but 500 milliseconds actually seems to be a good amount of time. And so now we want to run our check on the position of our ball. And because we don't want to continuously check the position of the ball unless the ball first exists. So we need to give it some conditions that need to be met, and only if those conditions are met will we run the code inside here. So to do that, we're going to go into logic and grab this thing called an if statement. So grab this block that says if true, then. All right. And so what this does is, where it says true, we can put in any conditions that we want, and only if those conditions are met will it run the code inside of the if statement. So it's really powerful stuff. And so in our case, we're going to build out a condition that says only if the ball exists and the ball position is less than 2 pixels for its Y value, then and only then will we subtract a life from the player's lives. So let's go ahead and build out this condition here. So we're going to go into logic, and because there's 2 conditions that we're checking for, we've got to grab this block here that has 2 empty slots with an AND in the middle. So grab that and drag that into our if statement to replace the true block. And so now we have our 2 slots for our conditions. And because we have the word and in the middle, that means both the conditions need to be met. If we changed it to or, that would mean either of these, if either of these conditions are met, then run the code. But we want to make sure both our conditions are met. Okay, so let's build out that first condition, which is the ball must exist, which means our ball exists value would need to be set to true in order to run this code. So go back into logic and grab this under comparison, this block that says 0 equals 0, and drag that into the first condition slot. So this condition is going to be if ball exists is equal to true, meaning a ball exists. So go into variables and grab the ball exists variable and drag it into the first slot. And it's a little tricky. Sometimes it doesn't want to snap into the spot where it's supposed to go. But there we go. So if ball exists is equal to true. So remember, we can grab a true block under logic and true, and then just drag that in to there. There we go. So our first condition is the ball has to exist, meaning our ball exists variable is equal to true. And then in the next condition, we're going to check that the ball's y coordinate is less than 2. So we're going to go back into logic and then grab this block that says 0 is less than 0 and drag that into the second condition slot. And so what we're going to be checking is that the position of our ball, our projectile, is less than 2. So to grab our projectile position, we're going to go into sprites and then grab this block that says my sprite x. Drag that into the first slot of our condition, and we're going to be checking not the x value but the y value. So click where it says x and change it to y. And we're not checking the position of my sprite, that's our player sprite. We want to change that to projectile because our projectile variable is our ball. So if the projectile y value is less than, remember we're going to say 2. Okay, so this is great. We've built out our if statement, which will only run the code inside it if a ball exists and our ball, our projectile's y value is less than 2, meaning it's kind of right up at the top, meaning that ball missed the net. All right, so that was like the hard part of this whole thing. Now we just have to tell it to subtract a life from our life variable. So go into the info category and grab this block that says change life by -1 and drag that into our if statement. So that's great. Now it should subtract a life if we miss the net. Oh, and you can see there what happened was it subtracted a life, but then it continued to subtract lives until the game was over because these conditions are still being met. We have to set the ball exists back to false, or else this is going to continue to run and subtract lives. So we have to one more time change the value of ball exists. So go back into variables, grab the set ball exists to block, and then after we subtracted 1 life, let's set this back to false. So go down to logic, grab a false block, and drag that in. Okay, so now if I miss, you can see it takes a life off. If I get the ball in, we score a point. If I miss, we lose a life. And if we lose all our lives, it automatically will run like game over function, and it displays our score, and it will actually keep track of your highest score as well. So that's pretty neat. Alright guys, so now we have our completed game and it's a lot more fun to play. We've added our scoring system, which gives our player a goal to reach a high score. We've added our lives to make it a little bit more difficult and challenging. But of course, there's still some things you could add to this game if you wanted to make it more complete. I'll give you a few ideas. An easy thing would be to add sounds. So if you go into the music category, there's all sorts of different music blocks. You could play different sounds for when, say, the player scores a basket versus when they miss a shot. You could play around with the velocity of our sprites to make the game more challenging. You could go into the controller category and set it so the player can actually control the movement of the player sprite. That could be interesting. Maybe make it so the net moves in different ways. That could be cool. A little bit more of an advanced challenge would be adding a system to allow the player to earn extra lives. So maybe every 10 points the player scores, you can reward them with an extra life. And you could do that pretty easily, using an on-game update block and an if statement. So go ahead and try some of those challenges. Thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you guys learned something and had fun. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.